The morning sun cast long shadows across the parking lot of Riverside Community College as Sarah Martinez pulled her old Honda Civic into a spot near the main building. She sat for a moment, checking her reflection in the rearview mirror and adjusting the long sleeves of her cardigan. At 28, she had learned to dress carefully for her job as a substitute teacher, always ensuring her arms were covered. The tattoo that wrapped around her right forearm was beautiful, an intricate design of an eagle soaring over waves with the words honor, courage, commitment woven into the artwork. But Sarah had discovered that not everyone appreciated its meaning or the story behind it. Most people saw the ink and made assumptions before bothering to learn who she really was. Walking through the faculty parking lot, Sarah noticed the usual morning routine. Teachers hurried toward the building with their coffee cups and lesson plans. Students gathered in small groups near the entrance, and maintenance workers tended to the landscaping. It was her third week substituting at this particular school, and she was starting to recognize faces and routines.
"Good morning, Sarah,"
called out Mrs. Henderson, the head secretary, as Sarah entered the main office. "You're covering for Mr. Johnson's history classes today. Room 237. Sarah nodded and collected the lesson plans from her mailbox. As she made her way down the hallway, she could hear the familiar sounds of a school coming to life, locker doors slamming, sneakers squeaking on polished floors, and the cheerful chaos of teenage voices. Room 237 was at the end of the corridor, and Sarah arrived just as the first bell rang. Students began filing in, their conversations continuing as they found their seats. She wrote her name on the whiteboard and turned to face the class. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Ms. Martinez, and I'll be your substitute teacher today." The first few periods went smoothly. Sarah had always enjoyed working with teenagers, finding their energy and curiosity refreshing. She moved around the classroom as she taught, occasionally rolling up her sleeves slightly before catching herself and pulling them back down. It was during the lunch break in the faculty room that the trouble began. Sarah had purchased a salad from the cafeteria and found an empty table near the window. She was reviewing the afternoon lesson plans when she heard her name mentioned from a nearby table. "Did you see the new substitute teacher, Sarah Martinez?" The voice belonged to Janet Pierce, a veteran English teacher known for her strong opinions about everything from dress codes to discipline policies. "What about her?" asked Tom Bradley, a math teacher who had been at the school for over a decade. "Well, I happened to see her in the parking lot this morning when she was getting something from her car. She has this enormous tattoo on her arm, completely inappropriate for someone working with children." Sarah's hand instinctively moved to her forearm, even though it was hidden beneath her cardigan. She continued eating her salad, trying to appear absorbed in her lesson plans while listening to the conversation. "A tattoo?" Tom sounded genuinely surprised. "She seems like such a nice, professional young woman." "That's exactly the problem," Janet continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who believed her opinions were facts. "These young people today think they can mark up their bodies however they want and still expect to be treated with respect. What kind of message does that send to our students?" Patricia Wells, the vice principal, had joined the conversation. "Are you certain about this, Janet? I haven't noticed anything unprofessional about Ms. Martinez's appearance." "I'm telling you, I saw it with my own eyes. Some kind of military-looking design with words all around it. Probably got it during some wild phase in college or something." "You know how these substitute teachers are. They bounce from school to school because no one wants to hire them full-time." Sarah felt her cheeks burning, but she forced herself to remain calm and continue reading. She had dealt with this kind of prejudice before, but it never got easier. The assumptions people made based on her tattoo were always painful, especially because they were so far from the truth. "I think you're being a bit harsh, Janet," said Maria Santos, a young science teacher who had started at the school the same year. "Lots of people have tattoos these days. It doesn't necessarily mean anything negative about their character." Janet scoffed. "Oh, please. When I was growing up, the only people with tattoos were sailors and criminals. Now everyone thinks they're some kind of artist. Mark my words, there's more to that girl's story than meets the eye, and it's probably not good." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with other teachers chiming in with their own opinions about tattoos, professional appearance, and the changing standards of society. Sarah finished her lunch quickly and excused herself, claiming she needed to prepare for the afternoon classes. Back in room 237, Sarah stood at the window looking out at the courtyard where students were enjoying their lunch break. She pulled up her sleeve and looked at her tattoo, tracing the outline of the eagle with her finger. The artwork was indeed intricate and beautiful, but more importantly, it represented the most significant period of her life. 5 years of service in the United States Navy. The eagle soared over stylized waves that represented the Pacific Ocean, where Sarah had served aboard the USS Monterey, a guided missile cruiser. The words honor, courage, commitment weren't just decorative text. They were the core values that had guided her through some of the most challenging and meaningful years of her life. Sarah had enlisted right after high school, driven by a desire to serve her country and see the world beyond her small hometown in Texas. The Navy had given her structure, purpose, and a sense of belonging she had never experienced before. She had excelled in her training and quickly earned the respect of her superiors and peers. During her deployment in the Western Pacific, Sarah had served as a communications specialist, managing critical information flows between ships and shore-based commands. She had worked long hours in demanding conditions, always maintaining the highest standards of professionalism and reliability. The tattoo had been designed by a fellow sailor, incorporating elements that represented Sarah's service and the bonds she had formed with her shipmates. She had gotten it during her final shore leave, after deciding not to re-enlist. The decision to leave the Navy hadn't been easy, but Sarah had wanted to pursue a career in education, feeling called to serve her community in a different way. After completing her bachelor's degree in history and her teaching certification, Sarah had discovered that the job market for new teachers was more challenging than she had expected. Substitute teaching had become a way to gain experience while waiting for a full-time position to open up. It wasn't ideal, but Sarah approached it with the same dedication and professionalism she had brought to her military service. The afternoon classes went well, with students engaged in discussions about World War II and the various factors that had led to American involvement in the conflict. Sarah found herself drawing on her military experience to provide context and insight that brought the historical events to life for her students.
Ms. Martinez asked Jake, a junior in her 6th period class, "Have you ever been in the military?"
"You seem to know a lot about military stuff." Sarah paused, considering her response. She had learned to be cautious about sharing personal information, especially given the reactions her military service sometimes provoked from people who had preconceived notions about women in the armed forces. "I have some experience with military history and culture," she replied diplomatically. "What made you think of that question?" "I don't know, just the way you talk about it. My dad was in the Army, and he explains things the same way you do." The final bell rang, and students began packing up their belongings. As they filed out of the classroom, several stopped to thank Sarah for the interesting lesson. Their genuine appreciation reminded her why she had chosen to pursue teaching despite the challenges and occasional prejudices she encountered. Sarah was cleaning the whiteboard when Dr. Wells appeared in the doorway. The vice principal entered the room with a measured stride, her expression neutral but attentive. "Ms. Martinez, do you have a moment? I'd like to speak with you about your time here at Riverside." Sarah's heart rate increased slightly, wondering if the lunchroom conversation had led to some kind of administrative action. She set down the eraser and turned to face Dr. Wells. "Of course. Is there something I should know about?" Dr. Wells closed the door and took a seat at one of the student desks. "I want to be direct with you because I believe in honest communication. There was some discussion among faculty members today regarding your professional appearance." Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but she maintained her composure. "I see. May I ask what specifically was concerning?" "It was brought to my attention that you have a tattoo on your arm." Now, I want to be clear that our dress code doesn't explicitly prohibit tattoos, but there are expectations about maintaining a professional appearance that's appropriate for our educational environment. Sarah nodded slowly, choosing her words carefully. "I understand your concern, Dr. Wells. I've always made an effort to dress professionally and keep my tattoo covered during school hours. If there was an incident where it was visible, it wasn't intentional. I appreciate that, and I want you to know that your teaching performance has been excellent. Students respond well to you, and other teachers have commented positively on your classroom management and lesson delivery." There was a pause as Dr. Wells seemed to consider her next words. However, I think it would be beneficial for everyone if we could address any potential concerns before they become larger issues. Would you be comfortable discussing the nature of your tattoo? Sarah took a deep breath, recognizing this as a moment where she could either retreat into defensiveness or choose to educate and inform. She had learned from her military experience that sometimes the best defense was honest communication. Dr. Wells, my tattoo is a tribute to my military service. I served 5 years in the United States Navy, and the design incorporates symbols and values that represent that experience. It's not something I got impulsively or without careful consideration. Wells's expression shifted noticeably, showing surprise and what appeared to be genuine interest. You're a military veteran? Yes, ma'am. I served aboard the USS Monterey in the Pacific Fleet. After my service, I completed my degree in teaching certification because I wanted to continue serving my community, just in a different capacity. The vice principal leaned back in her chair, processing this information. I had no idea. Your military background certainly isn't reflected in your personnel file, though I suppose there's no reason it would be. I don't usually mention it unless it's relevant to the situation. I've found that some people have strong reactions to military service, both positive and negative, and I prefer to be evaluated on my teaching abilities rather than my background. Wells nodded thoughtfully. I can understand that perspective. Sarah, I want you to know that your service to our country is something to be proud of, and if your tattoo is a meaningful tribute to that service, then it's certainly not something I would consider unprofessional. Relief washed over Sarah, though she tried not to show it too obviously. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to explain. I think there may have been some misunderstanding among the faculty about the nature of your tattoo. Would you be comfortable if I addressed this in our next staff meeting? Not specifically mentioning you by name, but perhaps discussing the importance of not making assumptions about our colleagues? Sarah considered the offer. Part of her wanted to simply continue covering the tattoo and avoiding any further controversy. But she also recognized that this might be an opportunity to educate people and potentially prevent similar situations for other veterans who might face similar prejudices. I think that would be helpful, Dr. Wells. And if you think it would be appropriate, I'd be willing to share my background more openly. There might be students here who are considering military service or who have family members in the armed forces. My experience could be valuable in those contexts. Dr. Wells smiled for the first time during their conversation. I think that's an excellent idea. We're always looking for ways to connect our curriculum to real-world experiences, and having a veteran on our substitute roster could be a tremendous resource. As Sarah packed up her materials for the day, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. The conversation with Dr. Wells had gone better than she had expected, and there was a possibility that her military background might actually become an asset rather than something to hide. Walking back through the hallway toward the main office, Sarah passed the faculty room where the lunchtime conversation had taken place. Through the open door, she could see Janet Pierce organizing papers at her desk, apparently staying late to work on lesson plans. For a moment, Sarah considered stopping to introduce herself properly and perhaps share a bit about her background. But she decided against it, recognizing that some people needed time and space to revise their assumptions. Change rarely happened through confrontation, but often occurred through consistent demonstration of character and competence. Outside in the parking lot, Sarah rolled down her windows and sat for a moment before starting her car. The late afternoon sun was warm, and she could hear the sounds of after-school activities beginning. Coaches calling out instructions, band instruments warming up, and the general buzz of students engaged in extracurricular pursuits. She looked down at her covered forearm and made a decision. Tomorrow, if the weather was warm enough, she might wear a short-sleeved blouse. Not to make a statement or prove a point, but simply because she was tired of hiding a part of herself that represented honor, sacrifice, and service. Sarah had learned many things during her military career, but perhaps the most important was that respect was earned through actions, not appearances. She was confident that her teaching, her professionalism, and her dedication to her students would speak louder than any preconceived notions about tattoos or military service. As she drove home, Sarah began thinking about how she might incorporate more of her real-world experience into her teaching. History wasn't just about dates and events in textbooks. It was about real people making difficult decisions under challenging circumstances. Her military experience had given her insights into leadership, teamwork, and perseverance
that could benefit her students in ways that extended far beyond the classroom. The next few days would reveal whether her conversation with Dr. Wells would lead to positive changes in the faculty's perception of her. But regardless of how others responded, Sarah knew that she had taken an important step in being true to herself while maintaining her professionalism. The tattoo on her arm wasn't just ink and artwork, it was a reminder of the values that had shaped her into the person she had become. Honor, courage, commitment weren't just words. They were principles that guided her decisions every day. Whether she was serving her country on a Navy ship or serving her community in a classroom, as Sarah pulled into her apartment complex, she felt a sense of quiet determination. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, and she was ready to meet them with the same courage and commitment that had carried her through her military service and into her chosen career in education. The next morning brought unseasonably warm weather for early October, and Sarah stood in front of her bedroom mirror considering her wardrobe choices. After her conversation with Dr. Wells the previous afternoon, she felt a new sense of confidence about being authentic while maintaining her professionalism. She selected a navy blue blouse with 3/4-length sleeves that would reveal a portion of her tattoo if she moved naturally throughout the day. It wasn't a dramatic gesture, but it represented a small step toward not hiding an important part of her identity. Sarah arrived at school 15 minutes early, as was her habit, and stopped by the main office to collect her materials for the day. She would be covering for Mrs. Patterson's English classes, which meant working with a different group of students and adjusting her teaching approach accordingly. "Good morning, Sarah." Mrs. Henderson greeted her warmly. "I heard from Dr. Saucely Wells that you had a good conversation yesterday. She mentioned you might have some interesting background experience to share with students." Word traveled fast in schools, Sarah reflected, but she was pleased that the vice principal had spoken positively about their discussion. "I hope I can contribute something valuable to the learning environment here." Making her way to room 184, Sarah encountered Maria Santos, the young science teacher who had defended her during the previous day's faculty room discussion. "Sarah, good morning. I wanted to apologize for what happened yesterday in the faculty room. Some people can be pretty quick to judge without knowing the full story." Sarah appreciated Maria's directness and kindness. "Thank you for saying something during the conversation. It meant more than you know." "Are you kidding? I have 3 tattoos myself, though they're all easily hidden." "I think it's ridiculous that people still make such a big deal about body art, especially when they don't know anything about the person or the meaning behind it." As they walked down the hallway together, Maria continued, "My brother is actually in the Marines, stationed at Camp Pendleton. He has several tattoos that commemorate his deployments and the friends he served with. When he comes home and people see his ink, they either assume he's some kind of troublemaker or they want to thank him for his service. It's like people can't see past the surface to who he really is as a person." Sarah felt a connection with Maria that she hadn't expected. "It sounds like your brother and I might have some similar experiences. Military service gives you a different perspective on a lot of things." Maria stopped walking and looked at Sarah with surprise. "Wait, you served in the military?" 5 years in the Navy. I should have mentioned it yesterday when you were sticking up for people with tattoos. My tattoo is actually a tribute to my service." "That's amazing. And that makes Janet Pierce's comments yesterday even more ignorant than I thought. Here she is criticizing someone who served our country." Maria shook her head in frustration. "Would you be interested in talking to my advanced biology class about military medical training? We're studying emergency response systems, and I think hearing from someone with real-world experience would be incredibly valuable." Sarah was touched by the invitation and the enthusiasm Maria showed. "I'd be happy to do that, though my expertise was in communications rather than medical training. But I did complete extensive emergency response training, and I worked closely with medical personnel during several deployments." "That would be perfect. Let's plan something for next week if you're still subbing here." They had reached Sarah's classroom, and students were beginning to arrive for first period. Maria squeezed Sarah's arm supportively. "I'm really glad we had this conversation. See you at lunch?" The morning classes went smoothly, with students engaged in discussions about character development in the novel they were reading. Sarah found that her military experience provided useful analogies for discussing themes of duty, sacrifice, and moral courage that appeared throughout the literature. During her third period class, Sarah was writing character names on the whiteboard when she heard a student gasp behind her. She turned to see Emma Rodriguez, a quiet junior who rarely spoke in class, staring at Sarah's partially visible tattoo with wide eyes. "Martinez," Emma said hesitantly, "is that a military tattoo?" The classroom fell silent, with all 26 students suddenly focused on their substitute teacher. Sarah realized this was a teachable moment that could go in several different directions. "It is," Sarah replied simply. "I served in the Navy for 5 years." The effect on the classroom was immediate. Students straightened in their seats, some leaning forward with obvious interest. Jake Morrison, a senior who had been slouching in the back row, sat up completely. "No way, really? My dad always said I should consider military service, but I don't know anything about it. What was it like?" Sarah recognized the genuine curiosity in Jake's voice and the interested expressions on the faces around the room. She made a quick decision to set aside the lesson plan temporarily. "Why don't you tell me what you'd like to know? I'm happy to answer questions, and then we can connect some of those experiences to the themes we've been discussing in your reading." Hands shot up around the room. Emma, who had first noticed the tattoo, raised her hand tentatively. "What made you decide to join the military?" Sarah perched on the edge of her desk, finding herself more comfortable than she had expected with this impromptu discussion. "I grew up in a small town in Texas, and I wanted to see the world and serve something bigger than myself. The Navy offered me opportunities for education, travel, and meaningful work that I couldn't find anywhere else at 18 years old." "Were you scared?" asked Lisa Chen, a sophomore who was typically very focused on her grades and college preparation. "Absolutely," Sarah replied honestly. "Boot camp was designed to be challenging, and there were definitely moments when I questioned whether I had made the right decision. But I also discovered strengths I didn't know I had, and developed confidence that has served me well in everything I've done since." Marcus Williams, one of the few African-American students in the class, raised his hand. "Did you face any discrimination or problems being a woman in the military?" Sarah appreciated the thoughtfulness of his question and the maturity he showed in asking it directly. "That's a really important question, Marcus. Yes, there were challenges. The military has made significant progress in gender integration, but it's still an environment where women sometimes have to work harder to prove themselves. I was fortunate to serve with many people who judged me by my work and character rather than my gender, but I won't pretend it was always easy." The discussion continued for another 15 minutes, with students asking about training, deployment, shipboard life, and the transition back to civilian life. Sarah found herself sharing stories and insights she rarely discussed, but the students' genuine interest and respectful questions made it feel natural and appropriate. "This connects perfectly to what we've been reading," Sarah observed, bringing the conversation back to the curriculum. "The characters in your novel are facing situations where they have to choose between personal comfort and larger principles. Military service often involves similar choices, though usually in less dramatic circumstances than what happens in literature." The remainder of the class period was spent analyzing specific scenes from the novel through the lens of service, sacrifice, and moral courage. Students participated more actively than they had in previous days, apparently energized by the real-world connections Sarah had provided. As students filed out at the end of the period, several stopped to thank her for sharing her experiences. Emma Rodriguez lingered after the others had left. "Miss Martinez, my older brother is thinking about joining the Marines after he graduates this year. My parents are really worried about it. Would it be okay if I asked you more questions sometime?" Sarah was moved by the trust Emma was placing in her. "Of course, Emma. I'm happy to talk with you anytime, and if your brother would like to speak with me directly, that would be fine too." Word of Sarah's military background spread quickly through the school, as it always did when something interesting happened. By lunchtime, several other teachers had approached her with questions and comments. Tom Bradley, the math teacher who had been part of the faculty room conversation the previous day, made a point of apologizing. "Sarah, I heard about your military service. I want you to know that I never agreed with Janet's comments yesterday, and now I feel even worse about the whole conversation. Thank you for your service." Sarah accepted his apology gracefully, recognizing that Tom seemed genuinely remorseful about participating in gossip rather than speaking up more forcefully. Wells appeared in the faculty room during lunch, which was unusual since administrators typically ate in their offices. She made her way over to Sarah's table. "I've been hearing some very positive feedback about your classes this morning. It sounds like sharing your background with students has been well received." The students had thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested. It felt natural to connect my experiences to the literature they're studying. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, and I have a proposal. We're planning a Veterans Day assembly next month, and we usually invite speakers from the community to address our students. Would you consider being one of our speakers?" Sarah felt honored by the invitation, though also slightly nervous about addressing the entire school. "I'd be happy to participate, Dr. Wells. What kind of presentation would you be looking for?" "Something personal but appropriate for a high school audience. Perhaps you could talk about leadership, service, or the values that military experience instills. We want our students to understand that service comes in many forms and that the people in their community have diverse backgrounds and experiences." Before Sarah could respond, Janet Pierce entered the faculty room and began preparing her lunch at the microwave. The conversation at Sarah's table became noticeably quieter, and Dr. Wells excused herself after confirming details about the Veterans Day assembly. Sarah continued eating her lunch, acutely aware of Janet's presence across the room. She had decided to approach these situations with patience rather than confrontation. But she also wasn't going to hide who she was anymore. The afternoon brought a different dynamic to her classes. Word had spread among students, and several teachers had apparently mentioned Sarah's military background in their own classes. Students arrived already knowing something about their substitute teacher's history, and their engagement was noticeably higher from the beginning. In her final period, a student named David Kim raised his hand during a discussion about character motivation in literature. "Martinez, yesterday you talked about how characters make decisions based on their values. In the military, how do you make decisions when different values might conflict with each other?" It was a sophisticated question that showed David had been thinking deeply about the previous day's lesson. "That's an excellent question, David. Military service often involves complex situations where values like loyalty, honesty, and duty might seem to conflict. The key is having a clear understanding of your fundamental principles and being able to prioritize them when difficult decisions have to be made." Sarah found herself sharing a story about a situation during her deployment when she had discovered that a fellow sailor was struggling with alcohol abuse. The choice between loyalty to a friend and duty to report a problem that could endanger the ship had been difficult, but ultimately her commitment to the safety of the crew had guided her decision. "The hardest choices aren't usually between right and wrong," Sarah explained. "They're usually between two things that are both right, or between doing what's easy and doing what's necessary." After school, Sarah was collecting her materials when Maria Santos appeared in her doorway with a young man she didn't recognize. "Sarah, I'd like you to meet my brother, Staff Sergeant Carlos Santos. He's home on leave for a few days, and I told him about our conversation this morning." Carlos was indeed recognizable as a Marine. His posture, haircut, and bearing made his military service obvious, even in civilian clothes. He extended his hand with a firm grip and a genuine smile. "Maria tells me you're Navy. Thanks for your service, and welcome to the teaching profession." "Thank you, Carlos. Maria mentioned you're stationed at Pendleton?" "That's right. Third deployment coming up next month." "Maria also said you've been dealing with some ignorant comments about your tattoos?" Sarah glanced at Maria, who shrugged apologetically. "I may have told him about yesterday's faculty room incident." Carlos rolled up his sleeve to reveal a tattoo that covered most of his forearm, an eagle, globe, and anchor surrounded by names and dates that clearly marked significant events in his military career. "I got tired of hiding these a long time ago," he said. "Every mark on my arm represents someone I served with or something important that happened during my time in the Corps. Anyone who has a problem with that can have a problem with me." Sarah admired Carlos's confidence, though she recognized that his approach might not work as well in an educational environment where diplomacy was often more effective than direct confrontation. "I found that education usually works better than confrontation," she said. "Most people aren't trying to be malicious. They just don't have the information or experience to understand what military service really means." "Maybe," Carlos replied, "but sometimes people need to be called out on their prejudices before they'll examine them." Maria looked between her brother and Sarah with an expression that suggested she had heard this philosophical difference before. "Why don't we agree that there's room for both approaches depending on the situation?" she suggested diplomatically. As they walked toward the parking lot together, Carlos asked Sarah about her plans for continuing in education. "I'm hoping to find a full-time position soon, but substitute teaching has been a good way to gain experience and figure out what age group and subjects work best for me." "Have you thought about teaching in schools with higher populations of military families? There are several districts near bases where your background might be especially valued." Sarah hadn't considered that possibility, but it made sense. "That's actually a really good suggestion. I'll look into opportunities in those areas." They had reached their cars and Carlos extended his hand again. "It was good meeting you, Sarah. Stick to your guns about being proud of your service. The right people will respect you for it, and the wrong people don't matter anyway." After Carlos and Maria left, Sarah sat in her car for a few minutes reflecting on the day. In less than 24 hours, her experience at Riverside Community College had shifted dramatically. She had gone from hiding her military background to sharing it openly with students and colleagues, and the response had been overwhelmingly positive. There were still challenges ahead. Not everyone would be as accepting as the students and teachers she had encountered today. Janet Pierce hadn't spoken to her directly, and there might be other faculty members who shared similar prejudices about tattoos or military service. But Sarah felt more confident than she had in months about her decision to pursue teaching. The connection she had made with students when discussing service, sacrifice, and moral courage reminded her why she had wanted to become an educator in the first place. Her military service had taught her valuable lessons about leadership, teamwork, and perseverance that translated directly to classroom management and instruction. More importantly, her experiences had given her a perspective on facing challenges and overcoming obstacles that could benefit students as they navigated their own difficult decisions and transitions. As Sarah drove home, she began thinking about the Veterans Day assembly Dr. Froxy Wells had mentioned. It would be an opportunity to share her story with the entire school community and perhaps help other veterans feel more comfortable about being open regarding their service. She also thought about Carlos's suggestion to look for positions in districts with military families. There might be opportunities to work with students who were dealing with deployment separations, frequent moves, or the unique stresses that came with having parents in the armed forces. The tattoo on her arm caught her attention as she turned the steering wheel, and Sarah smiled. Tomorrow, she would wear short sleeves without hesitation. The eagle soaring over the waves wasn't just artwork. It was a symbol of honor, courage, and commitment that had earned its place in the open rather than hidden beneath layers of fabric. For the first time since she had started substitute teaching, Sarah felt like she could be completely authentic while maintaining the professionalism that her students and colleagues deserved. The integration of her military experience with her educational goals was finally beginning to feel natural and purposeful. The evening ahead would be spent preparing for another day of teaching. But now that preparation would include thinking about how to weave her real-world experiences into lessons that would challenge and inspire her students to think beyond textbooks and consider the complex realities of service, sacrifice, and citizenship. 3 weeks later, the morning of the Veterans Day assembly arrived with crisp autumn air and clear skies. Sarah stood in front of her bathroom mirror, carefully adjusting the collar of her navy blue blazer. Underneath, she wore a simple white blouse with short sleeves that displayed her tattoo clearly. Today, there would be no hiding any part of who she was. The assembly was scheduled for second period, and Sarah had spent considerable time preparing her remarks. She wanted to strike the right balance between personal story and universal themes that would resonate with teenagers from diverse backgrounds. Arriving at school early, Sarah made her way to the auditorium where tech crew students were testing microphones and adjusting lighting. The stage looked larger and more intimidating than she had expected, but Sarah drew on her military experience with briefings and presentations to maintain her composure. "Good morning, Sarah. Are you ready for today?" Dr. Wells appeared beside her, carrying a folder of notes for the assembly. "As ready as I can be. I have to admit, addressing the entire school feels more nerve-wracking than some of the briefings I gave to senior officers during my Navy service." Wells smiled reassuringly. "You'll do wonderfully. I've seen how students respond to you in the classroom, and your story is exactly what they need to hear." Other speakers were arriving. A World War II veteran from the local VFW post, a young Army sergeant who had recently returned from deployment, and a retired Air Force colonel who now worked as a guidance counselor in a neighboring district. Sarah felt honored to be included among such distinguished company. First period classes proceeded normally, though students seemed more energetic than usual in anticipation of the assembly. Many had mentioned they were looking forward to hearing Sarah speak, and several had confided that they had family members who were veterans or currently serving. As second period began, students filed into the auditorium with the typical mixture of excitement and restlessness that accompanied any break from regular classroom routine. Sarah watched from backstage as nearly 800 teenagers found their seats, accompanied by the entire faculty and staff. She spotted familiar faces in the crowd: Emma Rodriguez sitting with her friends in the third row, Jake Morrison with the other seniors in the back section, and Maria Santos among the faculty members along the side wall. Even Janet Pierce was present, though she was seated at the far end of the faculty section and seemed to be avoiding eye contact. Wells took the podium to begin the assembly with remarks about the importance of Veterans Day and the contributions of military service members to American society. She then introduced the first speaker, the World War II veteran who captivated the audience with stories of his service in the Pacific Theater. As each speaker took their turn, Sarah noticed the respectful attention students were paying to their presentations. This was a generation that had grown up during wartime, with news of deployments and conflicts as part of their daily reality, yet many seemed to have limited direct contact with veterans or understanding of military service. Our next speaker, Dr. Wells announced, is someone many of you know as a substitute teacher here at Riverside, but who brings a unique perspective to our school community. Miss Sarah Martinez served 5 years in the United States Navy and now dedicates herself to serving students through education. Please welcome Ms. Martinez. Sarah walked to the podium amid polite applause, taking a moment to scan the audience and establish the same connection she had learned to create in her classrooms. The auditorium fell silent as students and faculty focused their attention on her. Good morning, Riverside. When I was your age, sitting in an auditorium like this one, I never imagined that my path would take me from a small town in Texas to ships in the Pacific Ocean and eventually to your classrooms. But that's the thing about service. It takes you places you never expected to go and teaches you things about yourself you never knew existed. Sarah had decided to begin with a personal story that would immediately engage her teenage audience. I enlisted in the Navy 3 days after my high school graduation. My parents thought I had lost my mind. My friends didn't understand why I would choose military service instead of going straight to college like they were doing. To be honest, I wasn't entirely sure myself. I just knew I wanted to be part of something bigger than my own life. She continued with stories from her boot camp experience, describing the challenges of physical training, academic study, and learning to work as part of a team where individual success depended entirely on collective effort. The Navy taught me that real strength isn't about what you can do by yourself. It's about what you can accomplish when you're willing to support others and trust them to support you. Every sailor on a ship depends on every other sailor to do their job correctly. If the person responsible for maintaining the navigation system makes a mistake, it doesn't just affect them, it affects everyone. Sarah noticed students leaning forward in their seats, clearly engaged with her presentation. She moved on to describe her deployment experiences and the communications work that had been her specialty. During my deployment in the Western Pacific, I was responsible for maintaining communication links between our ship and other naval units, as well as shore-based commands. It sounds technical, but what it really meant was that I was part of a network that kept people safe and helped them accomplish their missions. She shared a story about a typhoon that had threatened the fleet, requiring constant communication to coordinate the movement of multiple ships to safety while continuing their operational responsibilities. That experience taught me something about service that I try to bring to teaching. Whether you're serving your country or serving your community, it's about being reliable when other people are counting on you. It's about doing your job with excellence even when no one is watching, because you know that others depend on your commitment. The auditorium remained completely silent, with students showing the kind of focused attention that teachers rarely achieved during regular class periods. Sarah then addressed the topic that she knew was on many minds: the visible tattoo on her forearm. Some of you have noticed the tattoo on my arm, and some of you have asked about its meaning. This tattoo represents the 5 most challenging and rewarding years of my life. The eagle represents the ideals I served. freedom, courage, and the protection of others. The waves represent the Pacific Ocean, where I learned that the world is much larger and more complex than I had ever imagined. She rolled up her sleeve completely, displaying the full design to the assembled audience. The words honor, courage, commitment aren't just decorative. They are the core values that guided every decision I made during my military service. Honor means doing the right thing even when it's difficult or unpopular. Courage means facing challenges and fears head-on. Commitment means following through on your responsibilities to others, even when it requires personal sacrifice. Sarah paused, making eye contact with various sections of the audience. Those same values guide me as a teacher. When I work with students, I try to demonstrate honor by treating each of you with respect and honesty. I try to show courage by addressing difficult topics and challenging you to think critically. I try to display commitment by preparing thoroughly for every class and never giving up on students who are struggling. The connection Sarah was making between military service and teaching seemed to resonate strongly with students. Several teachers were nodding appreciatively, and even Janet Pierce appeared to be listening intently. Military service taught me that leadership isn't about having authority over other people. It's about taking responsibility for their success and well-being. The best officers I served under were the ones who made sure their sailors had the training, resources, and support they needed to excel in their roles. Sarah transitioned to discussing the transition from military to civilian life and her decision to pursue education. When I left the Navy, I had to figure out how to continue serving others in a meaningful way. Teaching allows me to serve my community by helping young people develop the knowledge and skills they need to become engaged citizens and successful adults. She addressed the students directly, encouraging them to consider various forms of service in their own lives. Service doesn't require military enlistment, though that's certainly one honorable option. Service is about finding ways to contribute to something larger than yourself. It might mean volunteering in your community, choosing a career that helps others, or simply being the kind of person who can be counted on by friends and family. As Sarah approached the conclusion of her presentation, she noticed movement in the back of the auditorium. The doors had opened quietly, and a man in a navy dress blue uniform was standing near the entrance. Even from a distance, the gold stripes on his sleeves indicated senior officer rank. Sarah continued her presentation while trying to process this unexpected development. She had no idea who the officer was or why he would be attending a high school assembly. In closing, I want you to know that each of you has the potential to serve others in meaningful ways. The values of honor, courage, and commitment aren't exclusive to military service. They can guide you in whatever path you choose to follow. The question isn't whether you're capable of serving others, but whether you're willing to embrace the responsibilities that come with service. The applause that followed was enthusiastic and sustained, with students and faculty rising to their feet. Sarah felt a sense of accomplishment and gratitude as she acknowledged the response. Wells returned to the podium to provide closing remarks and dismiss students back to their regular classes. As the auditorium began to empty, Sarah noticed the Navy officer making his way toward the stage against the flow of departing students. As he approached, Sarah could see the insignia more clearly. The 4 gold stripes and star identified him as a captain, equivalent to a full colonel in other branches and indicating command authority over major installations or ship groups. But it was when he got closer that Sarah recognized him, and her heart nearly stopped. Captain James Mitchell had been her commanding officer during her final deployment, the CO of the USS Monterey. She hadn't seen him in over 3 years, and she had no idea what had brought him to Riverside Community College. Captain Mitchell approached with the confident bearing that had made him one of the most respected officers in the fleet. As he reached the edge of the stage where Sarah was standing, he came to attention and rendered a perfect military salute. "Petty Officer Martinez," he said in a voice that carried clearly through the auditorium, where several dozen students and faculty members were still gathering their belongings. "It's good to see you again." Sarah instinctively returned the salute, her military training taking over despite her surprise and confusion. "Captain Mitchell, sir, this is completely unexpected. I was in the area for meetings at the Navy Recruiting District, and I heard through the grapevine that one of my former sailors was speaking at a local school assembly. I couldn't pass up the opportunity to hear what Sarah Martinez had to say about her Navy experience." The exchange was taking place in full view of everyone still in the auditorium, including Dr. Wells, several faculty members, and dozens of students who had stopped to watch the interaction between their substitute teacher and the high-ranking naval officer. Janet Pierce, who had been moving toward the exit, had frozen in place and was staring at the scene with obvious shock. Captain Mitchell continued, speaking loudly enough for nearby observers to hear clearly. Petty Officer Martinez was one of the finest sailors I had the privilege of commanding. Her work in communications was exemplary, and her leadership among junior personnel was outstanding. When she decided not to re-enlist, the Navy lost a sailor who could have had a distinguished career. Sarah was still processing the surreal nature of the situation, her former commanding officer appearing unexpectedly to praise her service in front of her current colleagues and students. "Thank you, sir. My time aboard the Monterey was incredibly meaningful to me. I know you've transitioned into education, and from what I observed today, you're bringing the same dedication and professionalism to teaching that you brought to your military service. The students here are fortunate to have you." Dr. Wells had approached the group and was listening with obvious interest and pride. "Captain Mitchell," Sarah said, "I'd like you to meet Dr. Patricia Wells, the vice principal here at Riverside Community College. Dr. Wells, this is Captain James Mitchell, who commanded the ship I served on during my final deployment." Captain Mitchell shook Dr. Wells's hand with the courtesy that senior officers were trained to display in civilian settings. "Dr. Wells, you have an exceptional educator in Miss Cassie Martinez. Her military record speaks to the same qualities that make excellent teachers: dedication, integrity, and genuine concern for the welfare of others." Dr. Wells beamed with obvious pride. "Captain Mitchell, we've been incredibly impressed with Sarah's work here. She's had a remarkable impact on our students in the short time she's been with us." By now, word of the interaction had spread through the remaining students and faculty in the auditorium. People were stopping to watch and listen, creating an impromptu gathering around the stage area. Emma Rodriguez, the student who had first noticed Sarah's tattoo, approached hesitantly with several of her friends. "Ms. Martinez, is this really your old boss from the Navy?" Sarah smiled at Emma's direct question and informal terminology. "Emma, this is Captain Mitchell, who was the commanding officer of my ship. In the Navy, we'd say he was my CO rather than my boss, but yes, he was the senior officer responsible for my unit." Captain Mitchell addressed the students with the same respect he would show to any audience. "Miss Martinez served with distinction aboard my ship. Military service requires people to perform demanding work under challenging conditions, often far from home and family. Martinez consistently exceeded expectations and earned the respect of everyone she served with." Jake Morrison, the senior who had asked about military service during Sarah's classroom discussion weeks earlier, raised his hand as if he were in class. "Captain Mitchell, sir, what was Miss Martinez like as a sailor?" Martinez exemplified the values she spoke about today: honor, courage, and commitment. She was the kind of sailor that other sailors looked up to for guidance and support. When difficult situations arose, she could be counted on to remain calm, think clearly, and do whatever was necessary to complete the mission. Maria Santos had joined the growing group, and Sarah could see her eyes shining with admiration and pride for her colleague. "Captain," Maria asked, "is it unusual for officers to attend events like this to recognize former service members?" Captain Mitchell's response carried the weight of command authority and genuine conviction. "It's unusual, but it shouldn't be. The sailors, Marines, soldiers, and airmen who serve our country deserve to be recognized for their contributions, especially when they continue serving their communities in civilian careers. Ms. Martinez represents the best of both military service and public education." Janet Pierce had moved closer to the group, and Sarah could see that her expression had transformed completely from the skepticism and disapproval she had shown weeks earlier. Dr. Wells seized the moment to make an announcement that would solidify Sarah's position at the school. "Captain Mitchell, I'm pleased to inform you that we've been so impressed with Sarah's work as a substitute teacher that we're offering her a full-time position for the spring semester. One of our history teachers will be taking maternity leave, and we can't think of anyone better qualified to provide our students with both academic excellence and real-world perspective." Sarah felt a rush of emotion at this unexpected news, delivered in front of her former commanding officer, and surrounded by students and colleagues who had come to respect and appreciate her contributions. "Wells, I'm honored by your confidence in me. I accept the position." "Congratulations, Sarah. The transition from military to civilian career isn't always easy, but you've clearly found where you belong. As the group began to disperse and students headed to their next classes, Captain Mitchell asked to speak with Sarah privately for a few minutes. Sarah, I want you to know that your presentation today was outstanding. You captured the essence of military service while making it relevant to young people who may never wear a uniform. That's a rare skill. Thank you, sir. I've been trying to figure out how to integrate my military experience with my teaching goals, and today felt like a breakthrough. I also want you to know that the Navy is always looking for qualified individuals to serve as civilian instructors at various training facilities. If you ever decide you want to combine your military background with education in a more direct way, there are opportunities available. Sarah was intrigued by the suggestion, but felt committed to continuing in traditional public education. I appreciate you letting me know about those possibilities, Captain. Right now, I'm excited about working with these students and this community, but it's good to know there are other ways to serve. Captain Mitchell nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of response I would expect from you. Stay focused on where you can make the biggest difference. As he prepared to leave, Captain Mitchell addressed the few remaining faculty members who were still present. Ladies and gentlemen, you're fortunate to have Mrs. Martinez as part of your educational team. Her military service prepared her well for the challenges of teaching, and her commitment to excellence will benefit your students immeasurably. After Captain Mitchell left the auditorium, Sarah found herself surrounded by colleagues and students who wanted to express their admiration and support. Janet Pierce approached last, after most of the others had dispersed. Her manner was completely different from their previous encounters. Sarah, I owe you a sincere apology. I made assumptions about you based on superficial observations, and I was completely wrong. Your presentation today and the respect shown by Captain Mitchell have opened my eyes to my own prejudices. Sarah appreciated Janet's directness and humility. Thank you for saying that, Janet. I understand that people form impressions based on limited information. What matters is being willing to revise those impressions when we learn more. I hope you'll give me a chance to demonstrate that I can be more open-minded in the future. I'd also like to learn more about how to support students who come from military families. The rest of the school day proceeded in a blur of congratulations, questions, and excitement about Sarah's new full-time position. Students who had attended the assembly spread word throughout the school, and Sarah found herself approached by dozens of young people who wanted to share their own connections to military service or express interest in learning more about career opportunities in the armed forces. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reflecting on the extraordinary turn her life had taken. In just a few weeks, she had gone from hiding her military background to being publicly recognized for her service by a senior officer in front of her entire school community. The tattoo on her arm caught the light as she moved, and Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her from the deck of a Navy ship to the classrooms of Riverside Community College. The values represented in that artwork, honor, courage, commitment, had guided her through the challenges of military service and were now shaping her approach to education. Tomorrow would bring new opportunities to serve students and contribute to her community. She would begin preparing for her new role as a full-time teacher, developing curriculum that would challenge students to think critically about history, citizenship, and their own potential for service. The respect and support she had received from Captain Mitchell, Dr. Wells, her colleagues, and her students had validated her decision to pursue teaching as a continuation of her service to others. The skills, experiences, and values developed during her military career were proving invaluable in her educational work. As Sarah prepared for bed, she felt grateful for the unexpected ways that life had unfolded. The prejudices and assumptions she had encountered along the way had been painful, but they had also strengthened her resolve to be authentic and to help others see beyond surface appearances to the character and capabilities that truly mattered. The eagle tattooed on her arm would continue to soar openly, representing not just her military service, but her ongoing commitment to honor, courage, and service in whatever form it took. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities, and Sarah Martinez was ready to meet them with the same dedication and professionalism that had earned her the salute of a naval commander and the respect of an entire school community.